Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a retired RAF police officer, I was particularly moved by the stories during which my own branch seems to have acted so zealously, and perhaps it's appropriate that I apologise on behalf of the RAF Police. My colleague, the Honourable Member for Epsom and Ewell, made the same request on behalf of the Royal Military Police. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm glad that at length this debate is now being held in this House after it was deprioritised by the previous government. Perhaps it would have been required Olympic standard political gymnastics to show empathy with the victims of the LGBT ban, apologising to those victims, as did Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, whilst manufacturing...
I made the point earlier, we do not in this House refer to serving members of the House by name. He remains the Right Honourable Member for Richmond and North Allerton.
Thank you for correcting me, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Right Honourable Member for Richmond and North Allerton, and doing so whilst the mother of Brianna Jai was in this, on this estate. I appreciate that's a bit of a change of tone from the rest of this debate, but I do think it's important that we recognise that the rhetoric we use in this House has a cultural impact across the rest of society. The government should be proud that it's brought this debate before the House. They have my gratitude, and I know that there are people present who were directly affected by this ban. That includes Leslie Davison, who's travelled from South Devon today to stand in the gallery with us. Our LGBT veterans should have been able to serve fully their honourable careers and retire simply as veterans. But they were unfairly discarded by the Ministry of Defence in line with the laws of the very country that they served. The Ministry of Defence is right to describe this as a moral stain upon the armed forces, but also on the history of our country. One haunting testimony comes from a constituent of North Shropshire, an account as to how hundreds of gallant, proud, selfless service personnel were hunted by the military police, arrested, interrogated, and often imprisoned for even an assumption of their sexuality. Take a moment, if you wouldn't mind, Madam Deputy Speaker, to imagine the line of questioning of an interrogation into one's sexuality. To everybody who was in any way affected by this ban, I believe you, and I am sorry. By the time I joined the Royal Air Force in 2000, the ban had been lifted, but the legacy of that ban and of the political culture of the time was a toxic mentality which remained for several years in plain sight. I recall my initial trade training at RAF Cosford. One particularly notorious training team threatened to call ahead to my future unit and have my head caved in once I arrived, merely for daring to voice support for the LGBT community. I was 17. I'm sure that such intolerance continues to persist in small pockets of narrow-mindedness beneath the surface today, but I am proud that the RAF I left in 2023 is indeed a greatly transformed and more inclusive organisation. I am now simply a veteran. During the general election campaign in June of this year, I joined some local veterans for a communal breakfast in Tewkesbury. Decent, honest and selfless, they meet regularly and welcomed me as one of their own. But before I was introduced to the group at large, one person pulled me aside and whispered, "Don't worry about the he-she, we just ignore it." Turned out that it was transgender Royal Navy veteran Gina Shelton, who had served in the closet as a man despite internally identifying as a woman. This to avoid persecution from her own friends and colleagues. I spent a few minutes speaking with her. She was seated clearly separately from the rest of the main group, and I could not help but to feel moved by her courage and dignity as she spoke matter-of-factly as to her circumstances, but with an affection and an understanding for those fellow veterans who even now disowned her. She took responsibility for the way she was now ostracised, which I admire but reject. I otherwise enjoyed the company of my fellow veterans. I should reiterate These are decent, honest people, but meeting Gina reminded me that changing minds is the greatest challenge before us, and that challenge will endure long after legislation. The Liberal Democrats have always stood with the LGBT plus community, and we are proud to have brought the Equal Marriage Bill into law whilst in government. I'm proud that those unjustly treated by the LGBT ban have now been able to speak their truth, and it is difficult to put a monetary figure on such an injustice. But having considered the announcement by the Secretary of State this afternoon, we still call to stand with the Royal British Legion and Fighting with Pride for an uplift of this fund to £150 million. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, let these veterans' legacy not be one of tragedy, but that the members of this House learn the lesson that the previous government never did, that the language we use here has real-world consequences. Thank you.